we tried to change the fundamentals of the web. And Web3 technologies, blockchain technology, may enable us to do so. But in order to do that, we need to really think about how to design a new type of web governance. And I was, talking about my 25 years of, experience as a digital entrepreneur. During these 25 years of exponential growth of digital technologies and the web, social scientists were not invited at the table. And we think it is also time now to bring them at the table with engineers to come together and think about this all-important issue around web governance. So this is what we're doing. Hopefully we're going to be able to start a relationship with all of you as PhDs and researchers. We would love to do that. So let's stay in touch, and thank you again for the invitation and this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eyraud, for your inspiring words and for your invitation to fix the internet, as well as the acknowledgement that social scientists are essential in that process. Now, on that note, I will move on to introducing our first speaker, Primavera De Philippe, who is a research director at the CNRS in Paris and also a faculty associate at the Berkman-Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. She's also the author of Blockchain and the Law, which was published by Harvard University Press. And most recently, she was awarded a 2 million euros research grant from the European Research Council to investigate how blockchain technology can help improve institutional governance. So let's all stay tuned for her fantastic upcoming work. Primavera, you didn't really need an introduction because I'm sure most of us in the room have engaged with your work in one way or another. So we are all very excited to listen to your talk. The floor is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you. And so this topic is going to be mostly about the metaverse and the extent to which the metaverse is evolving or not in the same direction as the internet could have or did, and what is the role that blockchain technology can play in order to increase the potential of the metaverse or to bring it into a more open and decentralized system. So before I begin, I just want to ask a little question to the room, like who here has the feeling that they know what the metaverse is? Who thinks they know what the metaverse is? Okay, and do you want to try and provide some kind of preliminary definition of what you consider the metaverse to be?
I frankly think that it's a business strategy by Facebook, and that we shouldn't necessarily take it very seriously as the future of the internet, unless we think that we want Facebook to dictate what that future is.
Okay, it's a very, very negative vision of the metaverse. Okay, is there any alternative definition? Everyone agrees with that? Wow. Okay, I hope I'm gonna try to make you change a little bit your mind. I actually have no idea what the metaverse is either, but I try to identify a few distinctive characteristics which I think might help us try to brainstorm what do we actually mean when we talk about the metaverse. And the problem is indeed that there's a lot of confusion and there is a lot of abuse of language because it becomes really hard to actually distinguish what is the internet, what is the metaverse, what is the cyberspace. Very similarly to just a few years ago, everything became cloud computing, and then every database is now becoming a blockchain. Now pretty much every online apps is now part of the metaverse. But if we try and think about what are those distinctive characteristics, so first of all, it's meta, meaning that it's a space that exists beyond our current reality. It is persistent in the sense that it exists all the time, even when we're not connected to it. It is immersive in the sense that it brings people together into a shared reality. Interactive, of course, in the sense that it feeds off the interaction and the contribution of its users. And very importantly, it is interconnected, meaning that it transcends and connects multiple realities, both physical and digital. Now, this is quite interesting, but actually if you look at those distinctive characteristics, they pretty much apply to the majority of internet platforms that we will then call metaverse. And so what is the actual discriminating factor between the internet and the metaverse? And so the internet, or the cyberspace, as it used to be called in the 90s, came with the promise of deterritorialization, with the newfound possibility to communicate with people all over the world in the matter of a few seconds. And this promise also came with a process of dematerialization and despatialization, in the sense that we now communicate with people behind our flat screen, and we no longer have the ability to situate our interlocutor in the space, and we don't have the ability to feel their presence into our surroundings. And so, despite the name, the cyberspace is not really a space. And so, the metaverse is reintroducing the notion of spatialization. One, because it integrates together with existing spaces, as with the case of augmented reality, but also because it enabled the construction of new digital spaces with virtual reality or others that reintegrate the notion of distance, of movement, and therefore spatialization, similarly to the physical world, even though those concepts do not necessarily fulfill the same prerogative as those in the physical world. And this is why the metaverse can make us dream with the promise to liberate ourselves from the physical constraint of the body and of the matter, while nonetheless maintaining the possibility to move, to transport each other, and therefore also to fly or to teletransport, which are things that are not conceptualized in the internet, where all you can do is connect or disconnect from a server. And so this means also that all of a sudden the notion of territory also reappears, but in a geographical sense, in the sense that one can situate into a space or can choose to move and travel from one place to the other, but also from a political and legal sense, because now we have the possibility to delimitate the land into parcels, and then we can appropriate those parcels in order to exploit them. And of course, financial speculation did not miss the occasion, starting in the early 2000s, where the first virtual land was sold on Second Life for a sum of $50,000, which at the time seemed like an exorbitant amount of money, until like a few months ago, where virtual land was sold on the Central Land for over $1 million, which all of a sudden didn't seem to be that exorbitant anymore. And the important point here is that the value of this land depends on its localization, because the more central is the land, then the more traffic it will be able to create, and therefore the most profitable it will be. And so we can see the irony as we are actually creating virtual worlds that are trying to replicate or simulate the same limitation as the physical world. Worlds that are not only limited in space, even though the virtual world is theoretically infinite, but also worlds which are literally flat, because this enables to engage into economic discrimination between those lands that are right in the center of the metaverse, that will be very expensive, and all those lands that are on the corner of the virtual world, which will be obviously less profitable. And so all this to say that the metaverse is no longer just a game. It is actually becoming a space of social, economic, and political interaction. And even though it is still a very early economy, there is already a lot of money that is transiting every day on the metaverse. And there are also a lot of new businesses that are settling on those new virtual worlds. And so what are those businesses? So first of all, there is the business of land, real estate, because if we can now sell virtual worlds for a few $1 million, then there is also a lot of money to be made by helping people find the right real estate. And so on the one hand, we have new startups that are specializing on the metaverse and helping clients find virtual land on different virtual worlds to buy or to rent. And then we also have existing real estate agencies that are introducing the metaverse into their own portfolio in order to give the opportunity to their clients to buy virtual land and then build digital infrastructure on top of this land in order to sell it more expensively or potentially to rent it to people that want to benefit from this infrastructure. And who wants to benefit from this infrastructure is the entertainment business, of course. So this is one of the, I don't know if it works. This is one of the first concerts on the metaverse. This was done by Travis Scott, which decided to experiment with a concert on Fortnite. And that was actually a huge success with more than 10 million users connected and a profit of over $20 million, which is 20 times more than the money that he will do on average on a traditional physical concert. And then we also have Lil Nas, another rapper that chose Roblox for his own concerts. Also a huge success with over 30 million users connected and a profit of several dozens of millions of dollars. They actually didn't disclose the real amount. But what's interesting is that the profits were made not just by the sale of tickets, but also by the sale of merchandising to all those avatars that actually attended the concert, so t-shirts or accessories. And then we have perhaps the most genius person with regard to marketing on the metaverse, another American rapper, Snoop Dogg, which has purchased a huge parcel of land on Sandbox and has built this huge mansion in which he's organizing concerts, but he's also organizing private VIP parties where the tickets is obviously much more expensive. And of course, as soon as Snoop Dogg has bought land on Sandbox, all the neighboring land have the price has just skyrocket because of course everyone wants to be a neighbor of Snoop Dogg. And then Snoop Dogg also created a partnership with Sandbox to create avatars that look like him. And so people can buy those avatars and impersonate Snoop Dogg, as well as buying a series of personal artifacts like clothing or dogs or his collection of cars, which are all for sale on the Sandbox platform. And so all this to say that the commercial opportunities of the metaverse have attracted a lot of economic actors, which are specialized in the sale of avatars or accessories for those avatars. And this also, of course, attracted the luxe company, the fashion companies, such as Gucci or Balenciaga, which were kind of the pioneer and were the first to actually sell virtual product into a variety of virtual worlds. And so what it means is that today we have a lot of people that are spending hundreds of dollars to dress up their avatars or to buy accessories for them. And there is even someone, this is an interesting case, there is someone that has spent $4,000 to buy a digital version of a Gucci bag on Roblox, while the actual physical bag sold in the Gucci boutique was actually for sale at like $3,500. So people are willing to pay more for a virtual bag than for the actual physical bag. Okay, so all this to bring us to the actual fundamental question that I want to address today, which is, what does it mean exactly when we buy accessories to our avatars on the metaverse? Who actually own those accessories, and therefore who owns the metaverse? And so, in theory, you might say that no one can own the metaverse because the metaverse is made up of this aggregation of multiple platforms which are administered and managed by a variety of actors in a decentralized manner, in a similar way as the internet. And yet, we all know today who controls the internet. And I need to add Elon Musk to this slide. And so the question is what guarantees us that the metaverse will not do the same end as the internet with the emergence of a few dominant platforms that will control most of the traffic and most of the infrastructure on the metaverse? And the problem is that today, the metaverse, as we might envision it, does not yet exist. And all we have is a variety of separated virtual worlds of different size, which are absolutely disconnected with one another and which are all competing to become the metaverse. And so depending on your age, this might remind you something. I think it reminds you something. So in the early 90s, when the internet was still trying to get standing up, we had those companies, American Online or CompuServe, that were providing an access to the internet in a closed walled garden that was completely controlled by them, and therefore did not benefit from all the opportunities of permissionless innovation that the internet is providing today. And when we look at the metaverse, the situation is actually quite similar, in the sense that we have today a few actors that are positioning themselves as the pioneer, as the leaders of the metaverse. And even though no one actually owns the metaverse, those operators actually can exercise absolute control over those virtual worlds that they are managing, and also, of course, over all the resources that are transiting over those platforms. What it means is that when you buy something on the metaverse, you don't actually own anything, because the platform operator owns everything. And so when I buy my Gucci bag on Roblox, I don't actually own much. First, because I have no guarantee that I will be able to keep it, because perhaps Gucci will stop its partnership with Roblox. And secondly, because there is no interoperability, I cannot transfer this bag into a different virtual world. And so the day in which I get completely bored of playing on Roblox, then bad luck, I need to leave all my digital properties. And so these raise interesting questions which regard to what is the nature, what is the future of all these investments into the metaverse. Because either we need to choose one platform, and so if I think that Roblox will become the dominant platform, as opposed to Fortnite or Sandbox, then I will invest into this platform, I will buy land, I will buy digital accessory for my avatar, I will actually deploy infrastructure on this space, and that's what people are doing today. But if I don't know which one will be the dominant platform, and perhaps this platform doesn't exist yet, and perhaps this platform will never exist, then I want to be able to invest into digital resources that have their own existence independently of the platform on which I have purchased them. And it's important because if we think about it, one of the main added value that the internet has provided is the interoperability of communications, which is the possibility of transferring message from one platform to the other in just a few seconds. And so in order for the vision of the metaverse to actually materialize, it also needs to provide some degree of interoperability. And interoperability in the metaverse does not mean just transferring communications. It also means the ability to transfer digital assets from one piece to the metaverse to the other. And what is actually missing for this vision of the metaverse to materialize is the notion of virtual property, which is the possibility to actually own digital resources in a way that is legally recognized as such, and in a way that the platform on which I purchase those digital assets have absolutely no power to take them away from me. Now, the problem is that one of the preconditions for there to be some kind of property is that there also is some kind of scarcity. And so physical objects are scarce because of their materiality. Whereas in the digital world, there is no such scarcity because digital content can be freely reproduced at infinity, and therefore we need to rely on artificial property, which is generated by copyright law. And yet, today, there is this new technology that enables us to create digital scarcity in the digital world, which is not based on artificial scarcity, but rather on technical and digital means. And so what does it mean exactly? Well, it's not so different to what we have done for a long time in the context of lithographies or photographies. Because even though a photography can be reproduced indefinitely, the artist might actually choose to create limited copies, limited editions of the photo, and therefore every print will be numbered and signed by the artist, and this is actually what will determine the value of those works. And so the interesting thing is that today with the blockchain, we actually can do the same thing with digital goods, because the blockchain enables us to create digital resources which are effectively scarce in the sense that they cannot be reproduced. So I'm not going to talk about it because you all know Bitcoins, but basically it's the first cryptocurrency that was created in 2008. And even though it is a virtual currency, the blockchain is such as to make impossible any attempt at reproducing or multiplying those Bitcoins. And so the same principles that apply to cryptocurrencies also apply to any other type of digital resource for which it is important to preserve the unicity and the authenticity. And so the blockchain relies on system of like cryptographic primitives and electronic signature and certificates in order to guarantee the unicity and the scarcity of all the resources recorded on the blockchain, which will therefore be able to be transferred in a peer-to-peer basis without having to fear that they will be illegitimately reproduced. And so as opposed to traditional cryptocurrencies, those digital resources are non-fungible. This means that a Bitcoin is the same as another Bitcoin, in the same as €1 is equivalent to another euro. Whereas those digital resources, they have specific distinctive characteristic that makes them unique and therefore non-interchangeable. And this is what we call non-fungible tokens, or NFT in blockchain jargon. And so most of those new technology are currently being used by artists and by other actors that are engaged into the digital economy, which for the first time in history have the possibility to create unique copies of those digital assets, which despite their immateriality will not be able to be reproduced. And of course, as soon as the art world has shown some interest in those new opportunities, the price of NFTs has skyrocketed to the moon until reaching like several hundreds and millions of dollars for a small animated GIF stored on the blockchain. But what is really interesting beyond the speculative opportunities is that these enable digital artists for the first time in history to monetize their digital work without having to transfer or license the copyright in their work. Because what they are selling is not the intellectual property over their work, but just the digital copy of those works. In the same way as when I buy a book, I'm not actually acquiring the copyright into the content of the book, but just the physical property of that copy. And so we can see how we can have different degrees of scarcity depending on where we stand into the manifestation of our work. So at the top, we have the general work of authorship, which is subject only to an artificial type of scarcity, which has been implemented by copyright law. And then this work can be incorporated into a digital file, which is not subject to any type of scarcity and can be freely reproduced, subject, of course, to the limitation of copyright. And then today, we can now tokenize this digital file into an NFT in order to create a unique copy of this digital file, which will then be subject to this new type of scarcity, which is digital or technical scarcity. And so a little recap to understand those different types of scarcity. So on the right, you can see like physical assets, which are scarce because of their materiality. And they can be either interchangeable, fungible, as in the case of money and gold and so forth, or they can be non-fungible, as in the case, for instance, of the unique painting of Picasso or Van Gogh. And then on the left, we have digital immaterial assets, which have been made scarce by technological means through the blockchain. And same way, they can be either fungible, as in the case of the majority of cryptocurrencies, or non-fungible, as in the case of NFTs. And it is precisely this last type of digital assets which can become virtual property. Okay, so a last little recap in order to illustrate the benefit of this new technology. So we started with the Web 1.0, which enabled us to receive passively information without the possibility to publish any commentary or reaction on this content. And then came the Web 2.0, which promote more participation and collaboration and the sharing of information on the internet. And then came the Web 3.0 with the advent of blockchain technology, which enabled us not only to receive and to share information, but also to own digital assets. Okay, so let's go back to the metaverse. So this little detour was actually necessary just to understand how, because of NFTs, we now have the possibility to own digital resources in a way that is actually really ours. And this means that I can now buy a Gucci bag on Roblox, but this bag will not exist only within the universe of Roblox. It will actually exist on this decentralized registry, the blockchain, which is not controlled, is not owned by any of those digital platforms, and therefore can be simultaneously used by a multiplicity of those platforms. And this means that finally I will be able to transfer my bag from one virtual world to the other. I might be able to visualize into my Zoom call. Perhaps I can land it to my friends on the Metaverse or Facebook or Meta. And potentially I could also sell it on the secondary market. And so now that we have this new information, we can try again to do some imagination exercise about like what is the actual future of the Metaverse and how might it look like in 10 to 20 years. And so it is fairly easy to imagine that the Metaverse will guide and support quite a large portion of our social and economic and political interaction, just like the internet has done in the last years. But it is more difficult to imagine what is the actual shape that this digital revolution will take, because it might evolve in actually two very different directions. And so on the one hand, we might see the emergence of this large dominant platform that will control the majority of the traffic and the infrastructure on the metaverse, and therefore also the majority of the assets that are transiting into those platforms. And in some way, it's not that different from what we see today with the GAFAM on the internet. Or we might actually see the emergence of a much more decentralized and interconnected metaverse. And these actually require a very strong degree of interoperability, and therefore the development of standards and protocols that are actively and collectively adopted by a variety of actors in the metaverse in order to maintain and ensure this interconnection. And these also require the adoption of a decentralized infrastructure that is secure, like the blockchain, that can guarantee the scarcity and the unicity of all those digital assets that are available on the metaverse. And we already have a few metaverse platforms that are actually moving into this direction. Platforms like Sandbox or Decentraland, CryptoVoxel, etc., which all relies on NFTs in order to guarantee the scarcity, the unicity, and the ownership of the digital assets that are for sale into those platforms. And then very new initiative just announced, I think, last week, Lamina One, which is a new initiative launched by Neil Stephenson, which is a science fiction author that is known for having coined the term metaverse in his book Snow Crash, published in 92. And Peter Vesenes, which is one of the co-founders of the Bitcoin Foundation that was created in 2012. And so those two pioneers are joining forces in order to launch a new blockchain that is specifically conceived in order to promote and facilitate the development of an open and decentralized metaverse. And so this means that perhaps thanks to those developments, we might one day be able to immerse ourselves into a metaverse that is more and more decentralized and interconnected, one that will no longer be owned and controlled by Roblox or Facebook, but that will actually emerge organically through the aggregation of multiple virtual worlds that connect with one another, and where the resources are actually owned by the participant and not by the platform operator. Okay, now, this is all very interesting, but maybe you might ask, but what's up with the physical world? Are we actually just indulging into the digital world in order to avoid actually facing the ecological, the economic, and the political crisis that the world is actually living? And is the metaverse perhaps just a tool to forget about those problems that we don't really want to address and close into this new reality that is virtual or augmented and which is actually increasingly disconnected from the physical world? And is the metaverse actually gonna successfully contribute to democratizing access to culture, to science, and to education? And will it actually succeed in facilitating the creation of new communities, of increasing like social links and collaboration, a little bit like the internet had actually promised us? Or is it actually going to contribute instead to further alienating us and to actually close ourselves into this new virtual reality in order to escape from another reality, the physical one, instead of actually trying to change this reality? And so facing this climatic, ecologic, economic, and political crisis that is imminent, there are two radically contrasting ideologies that are presenting themselves, oftentimes in a conflictual manner. So on the one hand, we have the degrowth movement, which basically claims that the only way to move forward is to actually move backward, because in a world where the resources are inherently limited, then we need, in order to reduce our energy consumption and our ecological footprint, we have to reduce the production, and therefore we have to accept to reduce the consumption and somehow find a different way to achieve prosperity than through economic growth. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have the Techno Solutionism, where the idea is that technology is our best ally, and the best way to move forward is to move forward even faster, because in a world that is in danger, we don't have the time to stop or to slow down. We actually need to further invest into technological innovation in order to fix the problem that previous technology have caused. And so the controversial question that I bring here is, could the metaverse actually reconcile those two apparently contradictory visions? Because even though it is actually really important to reduce consumption in a world that is intrinsically limited in its resources, it is oftentimes extremely difficult to change the mentality of people and to convince them to actually change their consumption patterns. And so the question then is, could we redirect those consumption into a different world, a world that actually has potentially infinite assets, which will be the metaverse? And so in this case, it means that the metaverse could present itself as this new alternative, a universe that is full of abundance and prosperity, where we could create and own an infinity of resources, as long as those are digital resources, in a way that could potentially reduce at least the ecological footprint. Now, the problem is that it is a beautiful vision and it's a beautiful narrative, but if we see the way in which the metaverse is currently being developed, we might actually hesitate in believing this will ever happen. And this is important because while the blockchain and NFTs are actually enabling us to emancipate away from the control and the constraints imposed by the centralized metaverse platforms, those same technology are also contributing to over-commodification of our digital space by the introduction of this new market economy, that is completely exacerbated, and which is actually feeding off scarcity and exclusivity in a world where abundance and sharing could actually be possible. And so this means that the blockchain is actually a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it enables us to create an open and interconnected metaverse, and especially thanks to NFT, we now have the possibility to really own those digital assets which become our virtual properties. On the other hand, the market economy that is created through this innovation is actually intentionally generating scarcity in order to reinforce the speculative dynamics and therefore maximize profit. And this actually prevents us from enjoying the real opportunities of the metaverse, which are essentially based on abundance of the immateriality of that space. Now, of course, the game is not over, and nothing prevents new metaverse platforms to emerge, also in a open and interconnected way that will not necessarily focus on private property, but rather on the creation of communities and on the production of the commons. And those virtual worlds can still leverage blockchain technology, but not with the intention to actually generate scarcity, but rather in order to put into places new governance structures which are more community-based, which are more decentralized, and whose objective is not the maximization of profit and individual utility, but rather the maximization of the common good and the general interest. And so just to conclude, of course, it is a very difficult bet. We cannot predict the future, and it's hard to tell which direction will the metaverse take. At the same time, we are also very lucky because we are still very early in the development of the metaverse, and we're also not just passive consumers of this virtual space, we're also actors, and we all can actually influence the way in which the metaverse will evolve, of course, by choosing which type of resources do we want to invest in, or by choosing which type of platform do we decide to use over the other, and what are the various usages that we could actually promote in order to push the metaverse in the direction that we like. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Primavera. Thank you for the fantastic presentation and for opening up the possibility of a decentralized and democratized metaverse. I'm sure that we'll keep referring back to these ideas in the panels today and tomorrow, so thank you for inspiring all of us. Now I want to introduce our second and final speaker, Maxim Carluck, who is a lawyer by formation, having a PhD in law, but who then joined UNESCO as a program specialist in the bioethics and ethics of science and technology section. He started there as the principal consultant on the ethics of AI, and then was part of the process of elaborating and implementing the first global normative instrument in this field, namely the Recommendation on the Ethics of AI. He's also a member of the European Commission Expert Group on AI and Data Education, and also a data education and training representative at UNESCO. Maxim, you have all these impressive affiliations, so we cannot wait to hear what you have to say. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. Very happy to be here and to speaking here. My slides, as you can already see, cannot compete with Primavera's slides. The only excuse I have is that I made them on my phone, but it's a bad excuse anyways. So the topic is, in fact, rather broad, ethical challenges of new technologies. Forgot to add AI. In fact, I will be talking mostly about AI because it's the field that I'm more, or say, was involved in recently, because as Theodora said, I work at UNESCO, and I was basically part of the process of the development of the recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence from the beginning to its adoption. Now it's implementation, and now it's sort of the first, indeed, global normative instrument in this field. I'll talk a bit more about it later on. So yeah, so in my presentation, I will try to focus on some specific things, not so as broad as the topic, mainly within the field of AI. And I will also try to touch upon the topics that you will be discussing here today and tomorrow, like competition, innovation, regulation, surveillance, things like that. I mean, the program looks really impressive in terms of the papers that you will be discussing and presenting. And in terms of the structure, I will be, so basically I wanted to cover these 4 main points. Understanding ethics, value neutrality thesis, which is in fact kind of this value neutrality thing falls under understanding of ethics, but I believe it is so important, so we need to actually to have it. I wanted to talk about it separately. Then a bit about challenges, and then what should be done. Now, understanding ethics, I mean, ethics in general, I mean, it's rather simple, no? So it's like what is good and what is bad, sort of general inquiry into what is good, right? And then there is also meta-ethics, which is more about what judgments like just or unjust laws mean and whether they can be true or false and things like that. But then there is normative ethics, which is mostly what basically we're talking about when we're talking about applying ethics to technologies. It is about the contents of those judgments that I mentioned, and yeah. So but also we can within technologies we also talk about the applied ethics, essentially specific cases of where ethics applies in technologies. So in fact the recommendation that I was talking about, it provides a sort of a definition what is understood by AI ethics itself. So it is a dynamic basis of reflection that can guide societies in dealing responsibly with the known and unknown impact of AI, aiming to ensure the protection of human dignity, human rights, well-being, and the prevention of harm. So this is general kind of definition, understanding of AI ethics. So right away, the question, I mean, there are many questions that can be posed here, but one of them, which was posed by many member states, because, I mean, this document was adopted through negotiations, interstate negotiations. And some of them were talking about, aren't you replacing human rights law, which is obligatory, with ethics, and in general regulation with ethics? And this is kind of the concern that I hear now here and there. And in fact, and recently I had a Chatham House discussion, so I cannot tell you who said that, but they were, like, again, raising the same absolutely issue. And they were saying, in any event, human rights law should trump ethics. But that's not what kind of, I think, in my view, this is a very limited understanding of ethics. What do I mean by that? Indeed, you can see that some companies try, indeed, portray ethics as something a bit of a superficial thing, which is not obligatory, a way sort of to avoid to go around regulation, right? But it is not the way we see it, and not the way we're trying to promote ethics on the global level. So in fact, our understanding of ethics, the way we try to promote it, is actually very comprehensive. In fact, one of the foundation of it is human rights. It's based on human rights, kind of one of common grounds that we're trying to establish throughout the world. Which is part of this ethical approach, and in this sense, human rights cannot trump ethics because it's already part of this ethics. So, having said that, so value neutrality thesis. So I don't know, you heard of it? No? Yes? No? Good. Some of you do, but anyways, the idea is that this value neutrality of technology, meaning that technology is morally and politically neutral. So basically, it's neither good or bad. It's essentially about how we use it for good or bad purposes. And you often hear that. AI as well is just a tool used by people. You can use it in good or bad ways. And in fact, you don't have to go far here because, in fact, at the very opening of the McCourt Institute, one of the speakers said absolutely the same thing. And I don't remember who it was, but a few speakers there. But basically, that was one of the arguments. But this is not necessarily the case. And in fact, in general, contemporary philosophers or like, how do you call it? Basically, theorists of technology, they agree that there is no such thing as value neutral technology. And I'm talking about people from different schools here. And this is especially true with regard to AI. And the reasons are multiple. One of them, let's say, I mean, I will not go through all of them, but one of the things is that AI technologies are, at least with the dominant methods that are being used today, dominant AI methods, they're based on large amounts of data, on huge computing power. And among others, AI systems are biased due to the data on which they are trained. So, because AI systems, they do depend on what kind of data is used, and data can be incomplete. It can include societal biases, then being extrapolated hugely on have really far-reaching consequences. For example, there is you definitely heard of that lack of gender representation in the data used to train AI systems is a huge issue, and gender biases are often present in AI data sets as such, and algorithms produced based on such biased data have really far-reaching consequences in stigmatizing further women or marginalizing women, and kind of on a global scale, in fact. So, but this is not the only thing. the teams who develop algorithms, they actually have lots of impact on them as well. And there is so this notion of the Conway's law, which says something like that, so that the absence of stated rules and instructions, the choices teams make, tend to reflect the implicit values of the group who are developing these technologies. And you know who are developing these technologies. No, the majority is basically it's male-dominated teams who design them. And I'm kind of linking here to the gender issue. So, and people are still making decisions. So when we're talking about AI is reaching this or that conclusion or decision or whatever, I mean, people are still making choices every step along the way for AI's development, and basically the personal ideas and the ideologies of people involved in this process, they pass down through the AI ecosystems. So, long story short, if you or someone like you is not present in the room where this is happening, this actually can impact by not reflecting who you are in these technologies in the AI systems. So therefore, my kind of conclusion here is that it's too late if we're only looking at the use stage of these technologies. If we're talking about regulation of this technology, if we're looking only into the use stage, it's already late. It's important to do that. We still have to do it, but we have to look at the whole life cycle from the very beginning, from the research, design, development, use, and even this concept, they can be kind of unpacked into other things. So we have to look at every single stage, and this is an important part. And this leads to this kind of coming back. Technology is not value neutral. I mean, here I'm also talking mainly about AI systems, of course. Now, this is the only media I have in my presentation. So now challenges. So I talk about bias a bit, and specifically gender biases. Examples are just endless. I mean, women AI professionals globally are only 22%. One of the examples, there is a huge gender gap, and we know, I mean, there's, according to recent data, it will take about 136 years to close the gender gap worldwide. And in AI and data, women make up only 32%. This is followed by other sectors which require disruptive technical skills, like in cloud computers, only 14% of workforce, engineer only 20%, things like that. And this kind of returns back to this how these technologies are being and by whom they are being shaped. There are lots of environmental concerns, of course. Someone calculated that to train one big deep learning model, language model, it produces as much CO2 as 125 trips between New York and Beijing. Then with regulation, I mean, it's a bit kind of, let's say, subject for a discussion, that regulations tend to be behind market developments. Not everyone agrees. We can discuss that. We'll have a discussion afterwards, no? Yes? Yeah? Okay. We can discuss many of these things. But in the field of AI, I would definitely think so. We still lack clear rules on how to attribute responsibility and ensure accountability in this field. I mean, it's understandable, because if technologies, if AI systems learn from the environment they are in, I mean, even those who develop them or who use them, they might not even have an ability to predict how these algorithms will behave and what kind of results will be achieved. So that's the issue. So I mean, it seems like there is a need for some proactive thinking beyond the traditional legal approaches. Rule of law. There is a lot of talk about establishing rule of law online or in digital world as we have it in the real world. At the same time, I mean, you know the what is it called? The state of rule of law in the real world, no? You know, no? So according to some institute, I forgot which one, World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index, last, I think about 5 years, several years, the rule of law in the real world has been declining several years in a row. So it's not only about building the same rule of laws we have in the real world, but actually trying to make it better in the digital world. And this is a huge challenge, of course. Competition. I mean, there's a big thing. There are people who know about it much more than I do, and it's one of the indeed major themes. because there are lots of issues about how the markets are structured, how they function, how they are regulated in the digital sphere. And we know about these internet intermediaries and digital platforms that can control and organize high-value ecosystems, which not only provide products and services, but also control infrastructures. So, I mean, and you heard of also about the, I mean, I'm sure you know that the US has new inquiries into this, European Union is developing new tools, things like that. There is the whole issue about the business model, about one of them is like the winner takes all. So, you know, the issue of monopolization. And it's not only about the companies. Of course, it's also relevant for the global level, because these technologies are basically controlled by very few firms in a very kind of selective parts of the world. And here I'm talking about the global south, which is not even part of the conversation. And it is not shaping this digital revolution. So yeah, and basically the current expansion of this digital economy in the global south is more about the closure of technical objects and the control of the physical infrastructures. Yeah, and the control just by a limited number of actors. And now data we all know, I mean, lots of issues arise here, as I said, because AI systems are based on large amounts of data. It's already, as I essentially mentioned, hard to look for justice even in the real world, when you're affected by a decision. But imagine with data when you don't even know if you are affected or not. You don't know how your data is being used, and there are no real, very often there are no real remedies in this regard. The list of issues is like endless, and there are issues of like conflicting objectives. Like for instance, we have this protection of IPR versus transparency of algorithm, privacy versus creating larger data sets. Because you know, one idea is how to avoid biases, just to have more data, more balanced data. But then the issue of privacy arises. What to do about that? So there are issues to be solved. So this is we are coming to the what should be done. So the question is, in fact, I mean, it should be a question mark. It's a question to you. I mean, this is why we have this kind of events, is actually to debate, to think about new ideas. What can be done about this? What should be done? Should is actually the word specifically about ethics, because ethics is about what should be, what is good, what is bad, and what should be done about it. And well, any event, regulation. This is what is kind of, let's say, okay, I will not go into details. Should be stronger. Okay, and so for instance, the recommendation, which I forgot to show you. We actually introduced quite a few provisions. I will leave a few copies for the organizers, maybe for the law school. So anyways, so the regulation in terms of surveillance, because one of the topics is being discussed here. So in the regulation here, we very surprisingly to me and to many others, because this document was adopted by consensus. 193 member states adopted it, including China. And there is a provision saying that AI systems should not be used for mass surveillance and for social scoring. Can you believe that? Of course, we can talk about this as a soft law instrument, etc. But soft law instruments, in fact, they have very specific, how to say, added value, and which sometimes is quite important. What they can bring to the table. So we can discuss this as well. Anyways, there is also some strong provisions in terms of legal personality. It's not my view, but this is what states agreed. Not all of them were initially in favor to it, but they essentially bans giving a legal personality to AI systems. Some states, like Japan, for instance, they're absolutely against it. At some point, they say, oh, okay, fine. But the main logic was there. No, maybe there are ways how to do this. We will still have to do some research and stuff like that. No, this thing says you cannot do it. There should be always an individual or an existing legal person to be found for the, let's say, responsibility issues. What else? For data, what do we have there? Yeah, so the thing is that about this document is that it's not purely, I mean, you're thinking about ethics, about, as I said at the beginning, in fact, it's about these ideas of principles, values. Indeed, we have these foundational values, we have this principle, but we go into policy areas as well, very specific policy areas and very specific policy actions, even in competition as well. I mean, it's not like super detailed, it's not this kind of document, but it deals with lots of issues and provides specific policy actions on data, on what to do about gender and things like that. So basically, just to end, because my time is over, so we need governance and regulatory tools to ensure that these technologies contribute to finding solutions and not creating actually more problems, to prevent their misuse, but also to prevent kind of unintended failures of these systems. Policies matter. Regulatory frameworks matter, and they can have they have the potential to achieve a good balance of strong protection while allowing for innovation to flourish. Need to actively tackle the abuse and misuse of AI technologies, promote diversity and inclusion in very broad sense from in all of these stages of the life cycle of these technologies, as I mentioned in the beginning. Fight against monopolization. Ensure transparency when decision making is involved, and it might be, I mean, the list is long again, might sound like really a hard task to do, but I mean the history is replete with examples of humanity coming together. I mean, even achieving this unanimous adoption of this was already a big step forward, so we can do this, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maxim, for bringing an ethical perspective to the table. Thank you also for the physical copy of the recommendation. Maybe one day we'll get the Metaverse version as well. Thank you also, Primavera, for your discussion. We'll move our conversation to the individual panels. The first two are on competition and emerging technologies. Bear in mind that they happen at 27 Rue Saint-Guillaume, so make sure not to get lost on the way. But before we go to the individual panels, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the people who made this event possible. I know that usually thank yous are for the end, but we don't have a collective final event, and also we are sure that everything will run smoothly, so there's no reason to worry about that, which is why I'm going to do it now. We have a couple of people at the McCourt Institute to thank, Delphine and Elvire. Thank you very much for everything you've done to make this possible. There's also a couple of people at Sciences Po Law School who are not here, but who made a lot of efforts to ensure this event runs smoothly. More precisely, Lily Divine, Bérangère, and also Professor Dina Waked. I also want to thank the moderators who have taken their time to get involved in our panels, our keynote speakers today, and also all of you for coming here to take part in this conversation about the future of law and technology. Thank you very much to all of you. And just so that I don't forget, there's someone very important who basically made this whole event happen. Rachel, thank you very much for everything you did. You were the great pillar of this event. Thank you. Okay, so now we all rush to 27 Rue Saint-Guillaume so that we are not late for the event.